Hello, everyone. It's Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Thursday, the 9th of June, 2022. And our topic today is the gentleman's redoubt. The gentleman's redoubt. As a preface, I alone am responsible for the content of this post and podcast, nobody else. Okay, June 9th, 2022. During his years as president of Washington College, Robert E. Lee famously implanted a spirit of gentlemanliness and honor among his students. Although the school had an honor code before he arrived, it was Lee who transformed it into a tool that taught the boys self-respect through student body self-enforcement. Only in recent years has its value declined as identity victimhood swept through the faculty and the administration. When one conscientious freshman asked Lee for a list of college rules, the general responded, quote, "We have but one rule here, and it is that every student must be a gentleman," close quote. Now, being a gentleman is easy when it's merely a matter of courtesy among friends, right? But Lee also displayed the gentlemanly way to discipline a student. His approach to youngsters in rebellion was summed up in a single sentence. Quote, "You cannot learn to be a true man until you learn to obey," close quote. When one student appeared for a disciplinary interview chewing tobacco, Lee said, quote, "Chewing is particularly obnoxious to me. Go out and remove that quid and never again appear before me chewing tobacco," close quote. When the student returned, still chewing, Lee wrote out a note, gave it to the boy, saying, quote, "Here is a note for you. It will be posted on the college bulletin in 10 minutes, close quote. The boy took the note and read between chews, quote, "Let's call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith is dismissed from Washington College for disrespect to the president," close quote. The boy left 3 days after nobody would speak to him. And he left 3 days later after nobody would speak to him. The General's Redoubt, a W&L alumni group, opposes the administration's progressive eradication of Lee's memory. Consistent with their gentlemanly training, the Redoubt's suggestions so far have been compromises and polite requests to address the student body concerning Lee's inspiring characteristics. The response from the faculty and the administration has been much like that of the tobacco chewing student. Unlike Lee, however, the Redoubt cannot dismiss their opponents. They don't have the power to dismiss the faculty or the administration. They're going to have to somehow get control of the board of directors or the board of visitors, whatever they call it. Since the faculty and administration are fully aware of the General Redoubt's powerlessness, they become increasingly uncompromising and even obnoxious. So, what should a gentleman do when his opponents refuse to be ladies and gentlemen? The ultimate antebellum response in that period of antebellum and the antebellum period was the code duello. But that ended with the Southern defeat in the Civil War. Consequently, 155 years later, our social media is filled with anonymous cowards who delight in cancel culture and name calling. Eventually, the opponents must be challenged directly. That is the lesson of Johnny Depp's libel victory over Amber Heard. Her conduct was awful, and her lies were whoppers. The so-called Me Too movement evolved into a form of pernicious feminism that endorsed the obvious nonsense that everyone must, quote, believe all women, close quote. The slogan is as much a madness as is the, quote, defund the police, close quote, slogan. Yet I would bet $200 against a good Cuban cigar that the proponents of such slogans at WNL, on campus at WNL, would be among those wanting to eradicate Lee's memory. In a similar context, Lee's proponents should not shrink from defending him as a Confederate general. He fought for his native land, not slavery. Before Virginia seceded, he told the father of Lincoln's Postmaster General, quote, "If I owned the 4 million slaves of the South, I would sacrifice them all to the Union," close quote. 4 years later, in January 1865, he urged that the Confederate government enlist slaves as volunteer soldiers, understanding that they would be emancipated for such service. Most importantly, Lee's devotion to duty and acceptance of personal responsibility puts President Biden to shame as a leader. Lee led by example, whereas Biden attempts to lead with obfuscation and cowardice. Consider Lee's conduct at the Battle of Gettysburg, where Pickett's failed charge left his army with his first decisive defeat. As the repulsed attackers retreated to their own lives, he rode out to meet them. General Pickett was among those he met, to whom he said, quote, "Your men have done all that men can do. The fault is entirely my own. It is I that have lost this fight," close quote. As other officers came to him, he made no effort to shift the blame. "It was all my fault," he repeated again and again in the presence of soldiers of every rank. When he returned his army safely to Virginia about a month later, he formally took responsibility for the defeat by offering his resignation to President Jefferson Davis. But Davis declined it. Now, in contrast, President Biden denies that Afghanistan was a debacle. He even calls the evacuation a great success. He takes no responsibility for today's inflation, which threatens to become the worst in our republic's history. I would not be surprised if that happens. Watch this month by month, week by week. He lacks the courage to face America's economic crisis and tries to shift responsibility to others, like the Federal Reserve. A man of Lee's devotion to duty and personal responsibility would be a better leadership role model for all Americans today than is Joe Biden, his Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, or his General of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. All three of these guys put more importance on removing Confederate names from military bases than controlling inflation. General Lee was the most beloved military commander on either side during the Civil War. The love his troops had for him had nothing to do with slavery. It resulted from his devotion to duty and the way he led by example. He customarily, for example, slept in a tent, as did his soldiers, whereas Union General Ulysses Grant would typically appropriate the home of a nearby plantation owner for his headquarters. at the Battle of Shiloh, Grant was sleeping in a mansion 10 miles distant from the battlefield when the Confederate attack began at dawn. He was out of the picture, sleeping in a plantation home. Lee, in contrast, slept in a tent. Now, if we want to save Lee's memory and our opponents won't play by the rules, there's no point in tiptoeing around his leadership qualities as a Confederate general. It provides a jujitsu method of turning a supposed weakness into a strength. Okay. I'd like to recommend The Confederacy at Flood Tide, $26 at Amazon, and $30 from me if you'd like an autographed copy. If you want that autographed copy, email me, Phil, PHIL _Lee, LEIGH at me.com. Okay, that's our show for today, and thanks for watching.